James catches, puts up a three. Won't go. Rebound Bosch. Back out to Allen. His three-pointer. Bang! Tie game with 5 seconds remaining.
Welcome back to the away team, everybody. This is Dmitri.
And Cole's here.
And today, no prizes for guessing what we're going to talk about. The NBA Finals. The Lakers and the Heat. We have 3 games that have already happened. Some interesting stuff. So let's just go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I think this is our first podcast since the finals started, right?
Yeah.
Last one was a preview. So just very quickly, Game 1 was an absolute nightmare for the Heat, right? Not only did they lose by 18, although that 18-point loss really felt more like a 30-point loss, I would say, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it was pretty hopeless. Probably like near the end of the first half.
Yeah.
I mean, there were like a couple of times when the bench guys, kind of had a little run going. I think Jimmy Butler came in the fourth when it was like a 13-point deficit, but they were never able to capitalize on any of it, and it was just a total run out.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically over after the big run that the Heat had at the beginning of the first quarter. And not only was it a brutal loss, they also lost Goran Dragic and Bam Adebayo to injuries. And it almost looked like they lost Jimmy Butler, which would have been insane.
Yeah, because he had twisted his ankle a bit early in the game, and I think when he came in the fourth, when I was talking about earlier,
and the ankle twist looked bad.
But then I think he landed funny on it again.
Yeah.
And I mean, I couldn't even imagine watching a series where the Heat didn't have any of those 3 guys. So at least Jimmy Butler was able to make it happen. But really unfortunate about Goran Dragic and Bam Adebayo. I mean, what can you even say?
There's just nothing to say. I mean, the world was so out on the Heat after Game 1 that Game 2 was the least viewed finals game of all time.
Wow.
6 million viewers.
6 million viewers.
And I guess there was a moment where the data was off by 1.5 million, so people thought at first it was 4.5 million viewers.
4.5 million. We have more listeners on the show on a regular basis. I mean, it's crazy.
Right? So, yeah, I mean, Game 2 happens, and it's almost just as gut-wrenching in a different way, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a blowout, but Miami shot 31 of 34 from the line, played like a perfect game plan, got all the calls, and still somehow lost the game by 10. Yeah. And if you watch the game, it just never felt like they were within reach.
Yeah, I mean, I think they shot 41% on threes as well. Like, they played such a good game. And to their credit, they actually won the second half by 4 points. The only problem is they gave up so many points in the first half that there was just really nothing they could do. There were a couple points at which they got within a couple of possessions, but as it happens, the other team also goes on a run and they run away from you. So, unfortunate, but I think you kind of saw the wheels start turning a little bit, maybe in Spoelstra's mind, and things start clicking a bit more, especially in that second half. Mm-hmm. And then Game 3, I mean, what more can be said? They came out swinging.
Yeah, I mean, I would say after Game 2, my personal opinion was if Miami can't win that game, and it doesn't even look particularly close, when they're getting 31 free points from the line, then how are they supposed to win a single game in this series? Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question was Jimmy Butler was putting the team on his back like he had a broken leg and he was Greg Jennings.
Maybe the ankle twist in the first game helped, just hobbling across the court, hitting fadeaways.
I mean, he actually was Greg Jennings in that Madden viral YouTube video, which we will put in the notes of the podcast.
It was unbelievable. He was the first player in the finals to outscore, out-assist, and out-rebound LeBron James.
Yeah.
LeBron James did lead in one statistical category, though, and that was turnovers. He had 8 turnovers.
Well, that's the craziest part is not only was Jimmy Butler putting up, a near perfect offensive game, 40 points, 11 boards, 13 assists,
And if I could interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
That 40 points is without a single 3-point attempt.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
God, that's just wild in 2020, you know? And it was on incredible shooting, right?
Yeah, he went 14 of 20, went 12 of 14 from the line. Really incredible. He went 6 of 6 on contested shots.
You know, this has nothing to do with the game, but I saw the pregame interview with Rachel Nichols, and he looked so happy. He looked like a guy that was about to go hang out with his friends at the park or something. Like, he exuded this confidence that I thought was actually comical, given how the Heat had been destroyed this series so far. But then he comes into the game, and it's like, from the get-go, he's perfect.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
It's funny because Eric Spoelstra was interviewed. People were like, what are you going to do? Everyone thinks that the Lakers are going to win. No one's giving you a snowball's chance in hell. What's going on? And he said, we don't give a shit what anyone else thinks. And basically passed along that entire energy to the team. And in particular, Jimmy Butler does not give a shit about what anyone else thinks. A guy who's never made it to the conference finals before in his career puts up one of the best finals performances in recent memory.
Yeah, I mean, the guy drives a minivan and listens to country music. He doesn't care what people think.
A true iconoclast, Jimmy Butler.
And, the offensive stats are amazing. He also guarded LeBron for basically the whole game.
Right.
And played amazing defense on him. I mean, LeBron still had a very good game, but he was held to, I think it was 15 field goal attempts? Something like that?
Yeah, he had 16 field goal attempts.
Yeah, that's a win.
Yeah.
That's if you can keep LeBron from shooting 20, 25 times a game, then your team's going to be all right.
And forcing him into 8 turnovers.
Yep.
That's really huge because the Heat, obviously they're somewhat of a disadvantage when it comes to maximizing their possessions, which we'll talk about later, just due to height, rebounding, that kind of thing. So anything that you can do to force turnovers, especially on someone like LeBron, who up until this point had been, dishing out like double-digit assists with like 1 turnover every game. That was huge. And that really stacked the odds in the favor of the Heat.
Yeah.
And I mean, also it's just how Jimmy Butler got those points, the post-ups. His post-up game was phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. He was just making it look like child's play out there.
Yeah, he gets into his stance and executes his post-ups and his layups so slowly. He's just so in control when he does it. And I think, especially at the end of the game, these guys have been playing in the bubble for 3 months. Everyone's exhausted. At the end of the game, that slowness becomes less of a liability. And I think he's just able to he's able to get to the right places in a calculated way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that he fakes guys out should be taught in schools.
Yeah.
He was insane. And, during the regular season, he was quite a good post-up player. He was in the 79th percentile on scoring on post-ups, got about 1 point per possession, which with a fairly inefficient play type like a post-up is pretty good. But he only averaged about 3 post-ups a game.
Yeah.
In game 3, he had 6, which I think reflected this kind of idea that, wait, this actually works. Why don't we do this more? Why don't we try to hunt down guys like KCP so that Jimmy Butler can post him up, because he's actually really, really good at that.
Yeah, and I think it was also clearly part of the game plan for the Heat. We've been talking about how passive Jimmy Butler's looked these playoffs really since the Celtics series.
Yeah.
I thought the first 2 games he looked passive. I know he had 25 points in game 2, but I don't know. It seemed like, given the circumstances, he should have been shooting more.
Yeah.
And then game 3 was finally the game where he took over.
Yeah. Well, I think Bam Adebayo had that Greg Jennings energy, just in reverse, because he got injured after putting the team on his back.
Putting the team on his back!
And just one thing, I think it's hilarious how the Heat, who are a team that have been lauded all postseason for their beautiful motion offense, team ball, the game that they win against the Lakers is just ISO brilliance.
And it was just so heavy on the alpha dog scoring mentality. I mean, the fourth quarter especially, we likened what Jimmy Butler was doing to watching a Dragon Ball Z episode where, like, the protagonist is, on his last legs. He's got barely any energy, but he still gets up again and, like, beats the enemy, It was nuts. He looked so exhausted.
Yeah, it's like that really sad...
And he kept scoring.
Yeah.
He just kept scoring.
It's like that really sad book that you read in, like, elementary school about the sled dogs, and they push themselves so hard to get, like, medicine to fucking the middle of Alaska or something, and then they die. But they did it. They did what they needed to do.
So are the dead ones Adebayo and Dragic?
Yeah, I guess so. Jimmy Butler's the last one.
No, they're the injured dogs, but the rest of the dogs, like, put them on the sled. And they're working extra hard to save their lives.
Is Tyler Hero just, like, a really fucking annoying puppy?
Tyler Harrow's the dog that's just sniffing his ass and running around in a circle.
Yeah, just biting the adults' ears and shit.
Jesus Christ. Yeah. So on the other side of the ball, let's talk a little bit about what happened to the Lakers. What were they doing in game 1 and 2 that was so great, and what changed?
Yeah, I mean, we have to give them credit. They won games 1 and 2 pretty commandingly, and I think a lot of it goes back to playoff Rondo, who I think people kind of forgot existed for a little while, but him plus AD plus LeBron is like the Holy Trinity. I don't know which one is the Heavenly Spirit, which one's the Son, which one's the Father. I don't really know how any of that works, but like they had this one play in game 2 where Rondo's standing above the break. LeBron's like in the middle of the paint. There's 3 guys just all around him. And Rondo just throws a perfect entry pass to LeBron, who just touch passes it to AD, and it's the easiest dunk you'll ever see. But, like, beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And, I mean, they had all sorts of easy money plays like that throughout those 2 games. But in Game 3, I mean, AD kind of just fell apart.
Yeah, it seems like Game 3 was the first game in, really, like, since before the conference finals that AD looked uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He got into early foul trouble, and he had an efficient offensive game, but only ended up taking 9 field goals.
Yeah.
And it was 15 points, something like that?
Yeah, 15 points.
15 points, that's just not going to cut it when you're a top 5 player in the league.
5 boards, also not going to cut it.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I mean, Anthony Davis is the sore spot for the Heat, right? The Heat shouldn't have a player to guard him anymore. In our preview podcast, one of the biggest things that we were looking at was how are Adebayo and Anthony Davis going to match up with each other?
Yeah.
Because they're tailor-made to guard each other. But we're not going to see that anymore, and the replacements are subpar.
Well, you got Jake Crowder, Kelly Olynyk, you got your Myers Leonards, just kind of like, it's like opening up an old toolbox and being like, well, this screwdriver isn't like too rusty yet. I can still use this. This box cutter still like cuts a little bit. It's, it's been rough. And that, I think in particular, is why it's so surprising. In the first couple games, he was dominating, and like dudes like Kelly Olynyk were just completely unable to box out. He was just manhandling them as soon as they attempted to. And I think Spoelstra probably did make a big point of it in Game 3 that, you don't have to win the rebounding battle against AD like 100% of the time, but you at least have to put up some kind of fight, play physical. And in particular, I think the issue with AD was the foul trouble, right? So, he got, I think, 2 fouls within the span of 30 seconds in the first quarter, one of which was a beautiful Jimmy Butler charge.
Yeah.
And then, he got a 3rd foul in the second quarter. And then I think a minute and a half into the 3rd quarter, he got his 4th foul and was just playing super passively since then. What kind of confuses me is that he continued that passivity into the 4th quarter when he only took 1 field goal attempt and didn't make it. And it's like, dude, 4 fouls in the 4th quarter is like, fine. You can still be playing. Like, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I think the Heat did a really good job of, first of all, Crowder has done a very good job on him.
Yeah.
He's held Anthony Davis to 50% shooting, which doesn't sound great. But when you look at what everyone else on the Heat has done, I mean, whenever Davis is switched on to any other player, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Like, he's shooting 66% against Olynyk, you know?
Yeah.
It's not great.
It's kind of funny because Jay Crowder, like, sometimes looks really bad because AD just shoots over him.
Yeah.
And just pulls up and shoots, and Jay Crowder, like...
But if that's happening, that's a win for Miami.
Yeah.
If you're limiting Davis to mid-range jump shots, that's a big win.
If you're taking him from a shot that he makes 75 to 80% of the time at the rim to one that he makes like 55% of the time in the playoffs in the mid-range. Like,
or even 45, you know?
Yeah. But I mean, up until this point, he's just had absurd efficiency on those shots.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have to pick your battles.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think the other side of it is Miami's gotten a lot of good offensive minutes from Myers Leonard and Olynyk in the last couple of games. Especially Olynyk last night. He had a really stellar game. 17 points on 5 of 9 from the field. And more importantly, 3 of 5 from 3. Some of those were big threes in the fourth quarter too, especially at the beginning of the fourth.
And not just that, but the fact that he's hitting those threes gives Jimmy Butler so much more space to operate, right? LA can't like sag off guys, right? They're forced to switch. Jimmy Butler is able to get those switches that he wants because LeBron, who's normally assigned to Butler, has to respect someone like Kelly Olynyk or even, let's say, well, obviously Duncan Robinson, guys like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just a very spread offense that I think is even atypical for Miami this bubble season, right? Because they've been starting Adebayo, which we'll get into a little bit later.
It's like a dog losing a leg and learning how to walk with 3 legs.
Yeah.
Kind of. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He still ended up being -1 for the game, but, I mean, that is overcoming how absolutely horrible he was on defense. And
oh my God, yeah.
continues to be. He also can't get a rebound to save his life. I mean, I think Kendrick Nunn might be a better rebounder than Kelly Olynyk.
He probably is. I mean, Kendrick Nunn got that block on AD, so maybe he's a better defender in
awesome.
general. Yeah. It's funny. We were watching the game with our buddy, and I think Kelly Olynyk got a steal on LeBron or something, and he was like, "This guy's an amazing defender." And we're like, did you just not watch the other 47 minutes and 59 seconds of this game? And with Olynyk, it's like the guy's tall. He's kind of athletic. Like, I wouldn't say he's like a super duper athlete, but he's athletic enough that he should put up a bit of a fight.
He's thick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's thick AF.
Yeah.
And the issue is just a complete lack of awareness. I mean, so many shots that AD gets are just, Olynyk has no idea.
Well, if AD takes him off the bounce, Olynyk can't do anything. He just doesn't have the foot speed.
Well, it's not only that, but he also just doesn't know how to read a play in advance. So if Rondo's driving and is going to dish it to AD in the dunker spot, Kelly Olynyk is focused entirely on Rondo. And then once he sees the ball moving, he's like, oh shit, AD's going to dunk it. And then by that point, the ball's already like gone through the hoop like 2 seconds ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at lineups where there's no Crowder and Olynyk's on the floor, and the defensive numbers on those lineups were comical. Like, they don't play very many minutes, or at least they didn't in the last game, because that's what I was isolating for. But when they were played, it was like 150 points per 100 possessions on defense.
Good God. What's funny, though, and this goes back to Kendrick Nunn being a better defender, the Olynyk-Nunn lineups in the playoffs have been plus 12 over 106 minutes with a 98 defensive rating, which is pretty good.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think I'm searching my memory banks back to the moments when Kendrick Nunn actually played during the regular season. It seems like, I mean, it literally was a year ago, so
pretty much.
I seem to remember him getting a lot of play with bench units. That would make sense that he has some chemistry with Kelly Olynyk.
Yeah, and he's been earning his minutes in the finals, I would say. Like, obviously, Spoelstra's playing him because he needs to, but I wouldn't think that... Nunn's been making mistakes, obviously. He's not the best defender as much as we're hyping him up. He gets lost on rotations and things like that.
And he's tiny.
And, yeah, he's so small.
Yeah.
But he can still block AD.
Yeah.
But
it was awesome. It was so good.
He's been relatively efficient, you know? Like, he's looked better than Tyler Hero in some of the games. So, good for him. You know, people kind of wrote him off in the beginning of the playoffs, and now he's back in the lineup.
Yeah, and just on the other side of the conversation of the centers for Miami is Leonard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who finally got back into the starting lineup. And I guess Spoelstra still refuses to play him more than 20 minutes a game. Last night, it was probably because Olynyk was playing so well.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't play those two guys together.
No.
But he was awesome. Leonard was plus 13 and went 3 for 3 from the field. I like the Leonard looks because they seem to have enough size to counter big guys like Dwight Howard.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Dwight had a pretty awesome first quarter, I mean,
Yeah.
He was still getting a lot of offensive rebounds. From watching the game, it seemed like they would have been at an even bigger disadvantage with Olynyk out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Myers Leonard does have some pretty questionable defense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, both of the guys are, like, pretty flawed, and I think the issue is that Olynyk...
He's better than Olynyk. He's just more athletic.
Myers Leonard?
Yeah.
Oh, in terms of defense?
Yeah,
Sure.
and he's a better talker on defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's apparently a big asset for him.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Olynyk is so much better in terms of, like, taking shots. Like, Myers Leonard is super efficient, but just never shoots the ball.
He's so passive.
Yeah. So, you just can't play him for that much.
And with Olynyk, I mean, they really needed him to be confident last night. You know, He was creating his own shot. He was getting very questionable calls from the officials on like LeBron and AD fouls that led to AD being in foul trouble.
Yeah.
And clearly frustrated the Lakers. So,
while we're on the subject of size, because size does matter, one thing that I noticed was, so Miami's...
Is it going to be like a weekly thing that we just pepper in a dick joke?
It should be a daily thing if we could record that often. But, I mean, how can you not?
Maybe I'll make that like a small Twitter series where once a day I just drop a dick joke.
I think that would probably grow our audience more than anything that we've done so far. So let's give it a shot. But
let's go. Anyways,
so the Heat, it's interesting. So they've been out-rebounded by the Lakers in every single game. However, if you look at the minute-weighted average height of the Heat lineups, they have risen from 6 foot 6 1/4 inches in game 1 to 6 foot 6 5/8 inches in game 2 to 6 7/8 inches in game 3. The Lakers have kept the same size the whole time. But you can see that the rebound advantage for the Lakers was plus 18 in game 1, which you can't come back from that.
Nope.
But in game 2, they got it down to plus 7. And in game 3, they actually got it down to plus 6. And a lot of the difference is that the Lakers are one of the best offensive rebounding teams in the league. And they've been averaging 12 offensive boards a game, which is insane. Miami, I think, has like 4.5. The thing is that the Heat have actually been winning the defensive rebounding battle in the last 2 games. So, you know, even though it looks like they're getting out-rebounded, there's actually a bit more to it.
Yeah, and I think that a big part of that is, I thought this was so strange, and we talked about this after game 1. The first lineup off the bench in game 1 was Iguodala at center with Solomon Hill. And, you know, we had seen how the Lakers tore apart the Houston Rockets in the conference semifinals. Small ball against the Lakers does not work.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that Spoelstra decided to go with that. Which, you know, your whole rotation is off at this point because you've lost 2 of your best players.
Right.
So, I mean, you can't blame him for making mistakes, but that was a big one. And I think you've seen less and less of that lineup. I think it played like 2 minutes in the last game.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's getting out there, but they just don't have anyone to get rebounds.
Yeah. Right.
That's the biggest issue.
Not only that, like, when you have to double AD on every single play just so you don't get steamrolled, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you doing? And then, yeah, obviously, if you have a bunch of smaller guys, even if AD misses, he'll just get his offensive board and get a putback, right?
Yeah.
One crucial thing that the Heat have been doing since Game 2 and into Game 3 was the Lakers' efficiency on putbacks and transition plays has plummeted, which is huge because the Lakers love doing those things because they're really good at offensive rebounding and they're really good at running the court. So the Lakers dropped from scoring 133 points per 100 putback plays to 29 in Game 3. They weren't letting him get anything like that. And I think if you want to continue winning, you have to shut that down. And they've done an amazing job. And the Lakers' transition efficiency was 91 points per 100, which is like terrible. And to add insult to injury, the Heat have been winning the half-court battle since Game 2 as well. So their half-court offense has actually been humming pretty well despite what it might have looked like in the last few games.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, if you watched the Lakers this season, you could tell that they were a transition team. I mean, they were second, I think, in transition points.
Something like that, yeah.
At least top 5. Well, I've looked at the stats. They were top 5 in every indicator.
That's a pretty good team.
Yeah. But what's interesting, and I think we talked about this in the finals preview podcast, is Miami has a bottom half of the league transition defense in terms of efficiency, right? But they are top 5 in terms of limiting transition points.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting, right? And probably shows you where that measly 29 is coming from.
Yeah. Well, and also explains why their offensive rebounding numbers are so bad. Because it's like, what's more important to you?
Yeah.
You know, getting the potential for another possession or making sure that the other team doesn't get a free 2 points going the other way.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Especially against the Lakers.
For sure. And just to transition, so we're just going to finish off our observations about Game 3 and then move into some future observations. What should we expect for Game 4 and what should we be looking out for? But just to finish that off, I think one of the biggest stories, and I think probably one of the most underrated stories from Game 3 was the difference in efficiency between the wings for Miami and the wings for the Lakers. Right? Duncan Robinson had... Dunk man! I mean, he had a pretty pedestrian game in terms of efficiency and scoring. He went 4 for 12 from the field and 3 for 10 from 3, but he led the team with a plus 27 net rating, which means that in the minutes that Duncan Robinson was out there, the Heat outscored the Lakers by 27 points, which is unreal, right? Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier off the mic, like just his gravity is something that the Lakers are always going to have to deal with, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of teams that have figured out ways to beat Miami through the regular season, for example, have keyed in to Duncan Robinson as that guy. One thing that I think is also notable about Duncan Robinson's play in Game 3, and I think this is more of a function of Spoelstra's adjustments, but the way that he hasn't been getting as destroyed on defense, and I think it has to do with the way that they're starting to switch really reactively, right? They'll have like hero or dunk will like flash, but then they'll quickly switch back, right? They'll just have just enough coverage so that you don't give up an open 3, but then you get your guy to a less threatening player as soon as possible. So I think that's one, Duncan Robinson, once he improves his efficiency, if he improves his efficiency, is going to unlock a whole nother level for the Heat. Question is, can he do it without Bam, who's like his best bud in dribble handoffs and things like that? But 2, is he going to be as much of a defensive liability as he has been leading up to this? Yeah,
and I think the way that you know his defense has been good this series is by looking at how freaking terribly Danny Green and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope have played. I think in the last game they were 1 for 11 overall.
Yeah.
And Danny Green was 0 for 6.
Yeah, and in game 2, they were 3 for 19 from 3.
Yeah, it's terrible. And I thought this was hilarious. We mentioned Duncan Robinson was plus 27 for the game. Contavious Caldwell-Pope was minus 26.
All things must be balanced.
So, I think that shows you how difficult it is for Caldwell-Pope to chase Duncan Robinson all game.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's impacting his offensive game because he's having to work so hard on defense.
Yeah.
Even when Duncan Robinson isn't having a particularly efficient game, he's Korver-esque in that his gravity bends the defense and it forces players to react and run more than they're used to.
Yeah, and he loves running.
He loves running.
He loves
sure
it.
Does.
Yeah, and he hit the dagger last night, so good for him.
Yeah.
And just to give you another measure of how bad Danny Green has been, he's getting less minutes than Alex Caruso, Rajon Rondo, and Markieff Morris, and Kyle Kuzma.
Well, what's weird is all of those players were good last night.
Yeah.
Especially Markieff and Kuzma. They both had 19 points.
Yeah.
Sharp shooters. Another underrated part of this game is that the Lakers bench was amazing. The Markieff Morris minutes were plus 10 for LA. Kyle Kuzma plus 6. Rajon Rondo plus 6, even though he had a fairly bad game in terms of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
We might as well just get into our questions for next game because one of them for me is how are the bench minutes going to go, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in this last game, the Lakers, like I said, really won the bench minutes, and they're doing it by playing a lot of guys, right? They played 4 players off the bench 23 or more minutes versus the Heat playing just one player, Olynyk, over 23 minutes.
Yeah, none was at 20, but, the cutoff was 23. Sorry, buddy. You didn't make it.
Poor nine.
And he took 3 field goal attempts, so he was basically a non-factor anyways.
Yeah. So that's something I'm watching because the Lakers players have played so well. Markieff Morris has been a fire-breathing dragon from 3 all postseason. And last game, Kuzma went 4 for 8 also. So
yeah. It's kind of funny because the whole narrative about the Lakers team was they have no depth.
Yeah.
And yet now you get this deep into the postseason and they probably have the most functional bench depth of any team that we've seen.
I know. It makes me laugh that the Clippers in their post-game interviews were saying oh, we got all these guys and we didn't have enough time to mesh them into the team, right? And then Markieff Morris is acquired off waivers a week before the season ends. And he's just unreal for the Lakers.
This is the best string of games that he's played probably ever, and it's happened on the way to a championship run. It's ridiculous.
He's shooting close to 50% from 3 for the playoffs.
Damn. Maybe he's the Korver-esque player, not Duncan Robinson. Move over, buddy. He took 11 3-point attempts last game. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, and he splits the rim every time he shoots, so good for him. Maybe when Marcus was eliminated, they just traded name tags and it's actually Marcus Morris.
How would you even know? I think Markieff is less of a jerk. I think significantly less. If it was actually Marcus Morris out there, I think we'd be getting a bunch of brawls. I think Jimmy Butler would be punching him in the face. I really don't think that it would end well.
Yeah, I think Marcus Morris is more of a jerk because he thinks he's a better basketball player.
He is a better basketball player.
Well, not always.
Yeah.
That hasn't always been the case. Back in Phoenix, Markieff was the better trade asset. They let Marcus go for 2 second-round picks or something.
Yeah.
And they got a first-round pick for Markieff.
Damn.
Yeah. And Markieff also, I think, attacked somebody and I think he got charged with battery for beating somebody up. I forget what the circumstances were with that.
It's kind of like a pendulum with the Morris brothers. One goes to the side of good and the other one goes to the side of evil. And then they swing back and forth for time eternal.
We got to stop talking about them.
Can we talk about Dion Waiters for a second? Who has not even worn a jersey in probably a month.
Someone on Twitter pointed out that he could possibly get a ring regardless of who wins because he was on the Heat earlier this season.
Oh, what the hell? That's awesome.
You remember the weed brownie incident?
It's the gummies.
Gummies, right.
Yeah.
He ate the gummies on the Heat's private jet and then had a weed freak out.
What do you think he's doing in his hotel room every day?
Okay, big questions. The biggest question is, will Bam and Goran Dragic come back, right?
Yeah.
So Bam has a shoulder injury that the Heat have been very vague about. I scoured the internet to figure out what is actually wrong with his shoulder, and they haven't said a word about it.
Well, it's also strange because it's not something that just happened in game 1 of the finals. Like, it's been bothering him since the Celtics series.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that amazing block he got on Jason Tatum actually did dislocate his shoulder a little bit.
Yeah, just stretch my shoulder here after that block. That was so good. Yeah, he actually strained his shoulder while he was flexing after the block.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he said he was going to play in Game 3. And then I guess at the last minute, Spo decided to sit him. So for Game 4, he's been upgraded from doubtful to questionable. I think that's an indication that he's going to actually play.
Yeah, I don't know how many times someone's questionable and they don't actually go out and play.
I just don't see why you would upgrade his status if he wasn't going to play.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's really interesting, I think, from a lot of different angles.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing that I'm thinking about is how much is he going to play?
Right.
No idea.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there will be a minutes restriction. It's weird because he, like we were saying earlier, the way that their offense runs transforms entirely when he's there and when he's not. It's kind of like what we saw with Indiana after Domantas Sabonis got injured. And then they started playing this 5-out system, like 3-guard lineups, things like that. And Miami's kind of adapted to play something akin to that without Bam, kind of foregoing those high post plays they often do when Bam's on the court. But, it's weird because they just figured out how to beat the Lakers. And then now they're going to add this guy that completely changes their situation.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I'm thinking about in terms of the offensive ramifications of Bam not playing is Jimmy Butler going to have as much space as he did in Game 3?
Right.
Because that's why he was able to take guys like Kentavious Caldwell-Pope down into the post so easily. It was a 4 spread out offense. When you don't have that, is it going to be as effective?
Right, and you've noticed that in the games where Bam has been out, Derek Jones Jr. also gets 0 minutes. They just don't sacrifice any spacing. I mean, Iguodala is not that great of a shooter, but you have guys that can at least take threes. I guess when Bam is in, the system works a little bit better so that Derek Jones Jr. can sub in for 7 to 10 minutes and get some positive defensive plays in,
Yeah. He played 1 minute.
Yeah. I think he played less than a minute in one of the games, but actually did end up on the box score.
Yeah, I think they round up for that. But yeah, obviously Bam would be a much appreciated upgrade on defense, and I don't even think we necessarily need to talk about that. I do think that the question becomes, is the upgrade on defense enough to outweigh the offensive capabilities that the Heat found in their last game?
Right, and will Jimmy Butler have to start shooting threes?
Yeah, I mean,
because
maybe.
He didn't have to take any last night when all of his teammates were sinking him.
Yep.
But when you have Bam out there, I think it becomes a much harder prospect to function that way without any spacing like that. I mean, Duncan Robinson almost counts as 2 guys, but, it's not ideal.
Yeah, and then on the other area of the court for the Heat, Goran Dragic, we actually know his injury. He has a torn left plantar fascia, which I did some very intense Wikipedia research earlier today. Wikipedia says it takes 12 weeks for a full recovery from either a complete or a partial tear of the plantar fascia. So, I don't know. He's doubtful for Game 2 and recently said, quote, "I don't have a timetable for return," end quote. Dragic said on Monday, quote, "It's not the easiest thing for me right now."
Yeah. And if I'm
Doesn't sound like he's going to play in this series.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath. And also, it's a contract year for him. So, like, if you get injured in the finals, just, like, playing a little bit before you have a chance to sign probably the last big contract of your career, that's not good.
Yeah,
It's
dude.
not good.
You
It's just
don't want to end
irresponsible.
up with fucking both feet having plantar fascia torn.
No, definitely not.
Just waddling around like he's, like the floor is lava.
Plays a really ground-bound game nowadays. Yeah, just doesn't move at all.
So no Dragic means more Harrow and none. And Harrow, I think, is at a really underwhelming finals. He came alive a little bit in Game 3, but, I mean, his box score stats for Game 3 were still pretty bad.
He had that snarl.
He snarled. He got a snarl in. The least intimidating snarl I've ever seen.
And it's not... The funny thing is, he's hitting the contested shots just fine. It's the wide open ones that he's not making.
I know. That's so obnoxious. I hate guys like that. They frustrate me to no end.
I wonder if it is one of those things... You know how some guys play better when they start rather than when they're on the bench? Maybe he plays better off the bench than starting.
Yeah, I mean, sports psychology is weird that way. Like, for me, I'm actually a better shooter in-game than I am, like, in practice. Really bizarre.
So how do you feel about your mother?
Let's not talk about her. Yeah, so that's something to keep an eye on. Defensively, both guys have serious limitations.
Yeah.
Nunn's is his size. Harrow's is also his size.
Yeah.
And LeBron has been feasting on Harrow post-ups.
Yeah, he just doesn't have an answer. Like, he is a little bit taller.
It looks
for a
like he's
guard.
beating up a kid.
Well, he is.
That's exactly what he's
Yeah, he's beating up a child. Yeah, I think the only maybe silver lining to the Dragic injury is that you can at least somewhat approximate what Dragic does with Harrow Nunn minutes, whereas for Bam, the other bigs on your team just can't do anything approaching what Bam does. But either way, obviously you'd rather have Goran Dragic, but, you know, injuries happen, unfortunately.
Yeah, and maybe the biggest thing to look out for Game 4 is, can Jimmy Butler keep up the production that he had in Game 3?
Yeah.
Even Goku can only retain his Super Saiyan form for so long, Dmitri.
I'm sure.
It-
I'll take your
it
word
takes-
for it. I didn't watch Dragon Ball Z as a kid, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, that's bullshit. Yes, you did. You were a Sailor Moon guy.
Yeah, I was a Sailor Moon. I liked, what's Mr. Valentine, Mr. Tuxedo?
Tuxedo Mask.
Yeah, Tuxedo Mask. That guy was cool.
Why do I remember that? I definitely didn't watch that show.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Okay.
But look, he's played 45 minutes in 2 straight games, and he's had a night off in between Game 2 and Game 3, and he will have had a night off in between Game 3 and Game 4. That's not very much time for a lot of minutes.
Yeah.
So, look, something's going to give eventually, and I hope that he can keep bringing it because it's just such an awesome story, and it's so fun to watch him put the team on his back. But I just doubt that he's going to be able to have the same game. I mean, it would be unprecedented for him to score 40 points and get a triple-double again.
Yeah.
Although these playoffs have been unprecedented and had... I mean, think about Jamal Murray and all those amazing games he had.
Yeah, it's been insane. Yeah, I think the hope is that some of the role players on the Heat start making their baskets.
Yeah.
Like, Kelly Olynyk's been good, but pretty much everyone else has been relatively inefficient, ineffective, and that's just been screwing everything else up. So I think that's going to have to be the answer because, yeah, Jimmy Butler can't do it all by himself. But,
Yeah.
I mean, how much of a pleasure it was to watch it in Game 3.
I know, right?
Amazing. And the other thing on the other side of the coin is that I highly doubt that LeBron is going to have a 8 turnover night and AD is going to have a 5 rebound night like they did in Game 3. Maybe one of them will have another bad game, but it's just not something that you can rely on unless Spoelstra has masterminded an answer to all of it, which I highly doubt you can do against guys like LeBron and AD. So yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that the Heat win another one, tie up the series. Let's make it competitive. No 3-1 holes.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say even bigger than the turnovers. Obviously, that's a huge issue, but the 25 shots between the two of them,
Yeah.
AD and LeBron, is unacceptable.
Yeah.
They need to each be shooting around 20 shots, I think.
Yeah.
So
LeBron's just stat hunting, dude. He's just trying to get assists. It's too bad Danny Green and Kentavious Caldwell both keep missing.
Brick City.
Cost him another triple-double last night.
Brick City. Brick City.
So,
All
yeah.
right. I think that's it for our thoughts on the first 3 games of the series. I'm so glad there was a win last night because it has upped my excitement level drastically.
Yeah. We were talking about, like, well, what do we do if it just turns into a 3-0 series?
We started getting really excited about doing some Hawks content.
Yeah.
But we're going to have to put that on the back burner.
We'll get it out there soon enough.
As always, check us out on Twitter at AwayTeamPod. I've been tweeting a fuck ton recently. And we've got potentially a special guest. Stay tuned for that.
Yep. We also got our first Twitter beef. So you DM us if you want to know more.
We'll have to figure out a way to make this public in a hilarious fashion because it's awesome.
Yeah, it's great.
So, yeah, that's it. As I said, stay tuned and enjoy the rest of the finals.
See you guys.